Alright, hello everybody. I have something for you today that I hope you will enjoy. A video came across my YouTube feed the other day. It's a video titled, "This Story Freaked Me the F Out" by a channel called American Strangeness. That title, I think, is a little bit algorithmic chasing, but it is not entirely inaccurate. What he talks about in this video that I'm going to link to is one of the stories in the first issue of Amazing Stories back from 1926. The story he's talking about is called "The Thing from Outside" by George Allen England, and he does a full reading of the story, which I figured I would direct you guys to as something fun to check out. It is a fairly good little short story, a little taste of cosmic horror. The story itself actually was a reprint in Amazing Stories because it was originally printed in the April 1923 issue of Science and Invention, which was itself a magazine that evolved from the Electrical Experimenter. And so when Hugo Gernsback, who was editor for both of these magazines, started out Weird Tales, he did a bunch of reprints, as I mentioned in an earlier video. And so this book, The Thing from Outside, was one of those reprints. Anyway, just to kind of give you a taste of what the story's about, see if you might want to go listen to it. This story is about a group of people out in the wilderness. And out in the wilderness, you think about dangers that are like terrain or weather, or even wild animals necessarily. But what if there was something from outside in the wilderness that was stalking you? Something that you can't see, something that is smarter than you, but something that also perceives you kind of the same way you might perceive an ant. Not a cryptid, but something else entirely, something from some other dimension or something like that. I would say that this is a good story on a very solid little cosmic horror idea. By now, if you read any cosmic horror, you've probably read stories with this kind of setup multiple times. But this was written all the way back in 1923, as I mentioned earlier. And so, this is still really early in the growth of cosmic horror. I would say that if I had to mention anything about the story that I thought was a little bit clumsy, it would be the handling of characters. There are lots of characters that have, I guess you would call them, multiple monikers. We have a journalist, a professor, a geologist, and George Allen England will alternatively use their names and their careers to describe the characters, and unless you were really careful to catch all of that early on in the story, you might get them confused later on in the story, because they're all out in the middle of the wilderness and they're basically trying to get away from this thing that seems to be stalking them, and none of them do any of the things that would connect their professions with their names. And so suddenly England will say the journalist, and you'll say, wait, who was that again? That's the one minor quibble I have with the way that this story is written. However, what I will say is that the main climax, which is kind of in like the fourth fifth of the story, right? 60 to 80%, is really interesting because the action in it, the things that are happening, are actually somewhat confused, and for good reason, and I think by design. There's a hint of unreliable narrator, plus there's some big time gaps that aren't really explained. There's a lot of strange reactions and behaviors of the characters, and you don't ever get a full explanation of what exactly happened out there. So you end up with a story that is very interesting to read. You have to read it closely because the action is a little bit confused, and they actually mention that in the introduction for the story by the editor, where it's like, you got to read this one closely because it's a little bit confused by design. Anyway, I thought it would be good to read just like a really short little excerpt from nearly the beginning of the story. No big spoilers, but just kind of a little taste to see what you'll get if you go and read or listen to the whole story. So here we go. "I don't see what there was in a mere circular print on a rock ledge to make our guides desert," said Professor Thorburn. His voice was as dry as his whole personality. Most extraordinary. "They knew what it was, all right," answered Jandron, geologist of the party. "So do I." He rubbed his cropped mustache. His eyes glinted grayly. "I've seen prints like that before. That was on the Labrador. And I've seen things happen where they were. And a little bit later, we get a nice little bit of description. Then silence fell upon the little night encampment in the wilds, a silence that was ominous. Pale, cold stars watched down from spaces infinitely far beyond man's trivial world. I won't do any more spoilers than that. Anyway, it's a good story. It's worth a read or worth a listen. I'll have links to both sources in the description. And that is what I've got for you for today. And yeah, have a good rest of your week, and I will see you next time.